Hi, today I want to talk about a translation example. This is an English to German translation for the state exam in Germany, and I want to propose some strategies that you can follow for the English to German translation exam. You're not allowed to use a dictionary there, so you're going to have to be very good at paraphrasing things, and you will need some background knowledge about Germany, so this text is going to test your basic knowledge of German political culture and history with some terms. But if you don't know these terms, there are ways to work around them. So let's start first here. We talked about this already in class today. Um, let's look at the first sentence and its translation. Um, so I made a lot of highlights and it might be a little confusing, but we'll get there. Germany, the most successful economy in Europe, has become Europe's paymaster since the Eurozone crisis broke out. So the first thing we notice here, of course, Germany, the theme of the sentence is in position 1. Then we have a statement, a rime about the theme, Europe's most successful economy in Europe. I did not say die erfolgreichste Volkswirtschaft in Europa. I use the possessive because it's easier, especially when you're talking about geography, countries. In German, you can use the possessive to create cohesion. In English, you can say it in some cases, but in some other cases you cannot use the possessive with place names. Anyways, so here I use the possessive instead of using a preposition because it's just simply easier. I try to avoid prepositions, try to avoid commas. Deutschland, Europas erfolgreichste Volkswirtschaft, right? This is a statement about Germany. Ist seit Ausbruch der Euro-Krise auch Europas Zahlmeister. So one interesting thing here, which I'm doing, and I'm doing all the time, is nominalization. If you notice the English, it says, since the Eurozone crisis broke out. But I'm literally saying, is since the outbreak of the Euro crisis. I'm nominalizing here because if I wrote it the other way in German, what would I have to say? Ist auch Europas Zahlmeister, seit die Euro-Krise ausgebrochen ist. So I would need a whole relative clause, subordinate clause, and that makes it very difficult to write. So what I do all the time, I nominalize all these verbs, and you will see that also in English. A lot of times verbs are written as gerunds, which is also like a form of nominalization. That's how you can think about it. Has become ist seit Ausbruch der Euro-Krise. And here they call it the Eurozone crisis, which was a little difficult for some people in the class because they're not sure what's the name of the crisis. So if you Google it, which you're not allowed to do in the exam, you will find out it's called the Euro-Krise in German, which is the crisis of the euro around like the European Union, actually around the year 2010. Why do we call it the Euro crisis? Well, because Eurozonenkrise is a little bit too long, right? If you don't know the actual name of the Euro crisis, you could say die Krise der Eurozone. You could actually say Ausbruch der Krise der Eurozone. Eurozone, which is a more literal translation, but it would work, and you're avoiding the risk of using the wrong name of the crisis. Ist seit Ausbruch der Euro-Krise auch Europas Zahlmeister? Zahlmeister is another term which you may or may not know. If you're not sure, I know that paymaster is translated as Zahlmeister. It means like also in the figurative sense. It can mean like just the treasurer of an association, but it can also mean like the person who has to pay for everything, right? If you want to translate it in a more literal sense, Zahlmeister is a metaphor, paymaster. So what we do with the metaphor is when we don't know a target language metaphor, we demetaphorize. So you could say, ist seit Ausbruch auch der Eurokrise auch für Europas Finanzen zuständig? For example, zuständig oder finanziell verantwortlich für Europa, financially responsible for Europe, right? So paymaster, you can paraphrase it as also in the English language, financially responsible. So first try an intralingual translation. Try finding another way to say it in the source language in English. But how did so now they're going on with a question, rhetorical question maybe, but how do they feel about it in Germany? So you have two ways. How do they feel about it in Germany? You have two ways to deal with the they. You can either use a passive, wie wird das in Deutschland gesehen? Or you can also use a metaphor, wie steht Deutschland dazu? Like Deutschland, the country, as a metaphor for all its people. Or you can use the impersonal pronoun Mann. How do they feel, right? And so you cannot say, wie fühlen Sie sich in Deutschland? Wie stehen die Leute in Deutschland dazu? You can say, how do the people in Germany feel about it? But you can't just say, how do they feel about it? Wie stehen Sie in Deutschland dazu? It doesn't work. But you can use Mann. If you're talking about people in general, Mann is a great way to deal with it, right? An impersonal pronoun. And the impersonal English pronoun is sometimes still one, but they is starting to become the gender neutral impersonal pronoun for he, she, right? For years it has been the German creed. Seit Jahren ist hier das Motto. Hier. So I'm using here as, do you call that a locative pronoun? I have no idea. But it is, the here is, I'm using it as a pronoun for Germany, right? I'm using it to refer to Germany, to Deutschland, and I don't want to repeat the Deutschland, right? Seit Jahren ist in Deutschland das Motto. For years it has been the German creed. Or you could say seit Jahren ist das deutsche Motto. More literally, right? Using the Deutsch as an adjective. What you cannot do, and that's also what I did in the first sentence. Don't use past tenses except the simple past, which is called, I think, the Präteritum in German, right? In German, we use the narrative present, or it's also called the historical present, historisches Präsens. Seit Jahren ist. Seit Jahren ist. This is a very interesting construction, because ist the present tense. Seit Jahren ist. But because we're adding seit Jahren, we are marking that it's an ongoing historical process in the same way that in English, it has been is marking that, right? It has been, is that the past progressive? I guess. So it's like a progressive tense, and this is saying the same thing as here. Do not write seit Jahren ist das Motto gewesen. Also in the first sentence, Deutschland, Europas erfolgreichste Volkswirtschaft, ist seit Ausbruch, right? We have simple present and seit Ausbruch, a marker for time. And here in English we have has become, literally ist geworden. But you don't write Europas erfolgreichste Volkswirtschaft ist seit Ausbruch der Eurokrise auch Europas Zahlmeister geworden. Why? Ist seit Ausbruch der Eurokrise auch Europas Zahlmeister geworden. Why do you don't need it? It's totally optional. It's because it's already marked. Always think about every word is also like a grammatical marker. This is a complete sentence. Ist seit Ausbruch der Eurokrise auch Europas Zahlmeister? and geworden is optional. So don't double mark the tense. It's already marked. In German, we mark the tense in writing, in journalism. In fiction, maybe is another thing, but in journalism, we mark the tense usually by using the simple Präsens and then adding like time information. Ist in Zukunft, for example, which would translate into will be. So we often don't write wird sein. This is spoken language. Ich war gewesen, ich werde sein, and these tenses are just confusing to use in German. They add no content. They only mark the time, right? So we try to keep them short. And this is going to come up a couple of more times in this text. So, seit Jahren ist hier das Motto: ein europäisches Deutschland, kein deutsches Europa. Ein europäisches Deutschland, kein deutsches Europa. And so I said motto. You have to be careful. The German creed also translated as Glaubensbekenntnis, Credo, Glaubenssatz, many ways to say it. How do we know which is the best? Simplest one. Motto is, every Bild reader is going to understand motto. Credo, that's already Latin, which Bildungssprache. Avoid using Latin words in general purpose writing. It really depends. It's also where you have to know about the audience. If you're writing for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, you can use Credo. If you're writing for the Bild Zeitung, you're not going to use Credo. So you're not going to get this information probably in the written exam, in the government exam, but maybe ask for it. Say, who's the intended audience of this text? Very important to know. That lets you adjust your register. So seit Jahren ist hier das Motto: ein europäisches Deutschland, kein deutsches Europa. We have some other alternatives here. Ein europäisches Deutschland anstatt eines deutschen Europas. Very correct. Ein europäisches Deutschland anstatt eines deutschen Europas. Anstatt einem geht nicht, ne? So it's genitive. And we have big problems with the genitive. It's good if you know how to use it, but using it is actually showing off. You're showing off that you know how to form the genitive. And it's hard to write. It makes your writing more complex. It makes it less accessible. It's phatic information, you might say. So it's actually telling more about your social status and what you think of yourself than it's actually saying about the matter you're talking about. So I would say avoid it. It's not necessary. In other situations, we need the genitive in writing, but don't overdo it. Don't overdo the genitive. Or another way to say it would be ein europäisches Deutschland, aber kein deutsches Europa. Aber kein deutsches Europa. So another option would be aber. This was what one of the classmates wrote. And this is actually, it's been studied. Translators do that. They standardize text and disambiguate, right? So they would add like these optional contrastive elements to show that, to make the text easier to understand. So again, dennoch ist inzwischen. Here it's the same thing. Narrative present. Ist inzwischen. So it is right now. Now finds itself, right? In English, you might occasionally see the present progressive being used here. Is now finding itself. Is now finding itself. And overusing the present progressive is also can be like sales clerksy language, you know, not a little overdone. Anyway, here we're also we're marking the present. We're actually double marking the present, right? So we're not saying es ist geworden, ist das Deutschland Wirtschaftswunderland inzwischen Europas Wirtschaftsmotor geworden. We don't say that. Just simple present and one-time markers. So we know inzwischen means it actually means it's a perfected. It's a completed process. Wirtschaftswunderland was complicated for many. And yet Germany with its economic miracle, so others have translated it Deutschland mit seinem Wirtschaftswunder, which is also fine. Deutschland, mit seinem Wirtschaftswunder. Und dennoch ist das deutsche Wirtschaftswunder inzwischen für Europa unabkömmlich. The problem here is if you say das deutsche Wirtschaftswunder, everybody's going to think of the 1950s. Because deutsches Wirtschaftswunder is like such a set phrase, but if you say das Wirtschaftswunderland, maybe people will understand that from the context, you're talking about the economic miracle of 2010, that Germany didn't get hit by the Eurozone crisis, that it actually profited from the Eurozone crisis. And now now here I'm using Wirtschaftsmotor because I'm really lazy. I'm using a metaphor. It's literally the economic miracle country, or the economic Wunderkind, is finding itself as Europe's economic engine. Instead of saying is now finds itself as Europe's indispensable power, because if you call something an engine, it means they're indispensable. Without an engine, there's no machine, right? So that's a way to do it and keep it easy, because if you don't have this noun, simple noun, and a metaphor thrown in, you have to think about a verb, and it's really hard. Verbs are a pain in the ass. So if you're going to say, das deutsche Wirtschaftswunder ist inzwischen für Europa unabkömmlich, unersetzlich, indispensable. Yeah, you're going to have to look for something to translate indispensable. And the easiest way is to use an image, because I can't think of any kritisch für Europa. That would be an adjective, yeah. Or sorry, it's an adjective, not a verb. It's an adjective. You're going to have to look for some kind of adjective. And that's just more work. If you think of an image, you know? Its political class did not seek this role. Die politische Klasse war nicht auf diese Rolle aus. That's hard. Auf etwas aus sein. That's very colloquial German. I'm out to take the role, right? I'm out to get this, you know? And we can say that in spoken German. We can even write that in written German. And that's the easiest way to say it. Die politische Klasse, but how can you say that if you don't know these very colloquial verbs? Or this, yeah, these, is it a verb? If you don't know these verbs, die politische Klasse wollte diese Rolle nicht, right? So you can make a statement, state their intention to want. You can use a simple verb like that. They didn't want the role. Here they say they did not seek the role, right? So here again you can say, aussuchen. Die politische Klasse hat sich diese Rolle nicht ausgesucht. You could say that too. But then it's also a little difficult to form, let's say. Komma, aber dennoch, but in Europe today, aber dennoch trifft man heute in Europa, remember, time, manner, place. Here they say, but in Europe today. Here we say, but today in Europe, because Germany is a time, manner, place language, right? So first comes the time, and we don't have a manner here, and then comes the place in Europe. Very important. Aber dennoch trifft man in Europa heute keine Entscheidung. Would work in this place, but in a lot of cases it would not work. Aber dennoch trifft man heute in Europa keine Entscheidung. Today, no. So again, I'm sticking very much to the impersonal pronoun man. I'm not using the passive because I'm very big advocate of avoiding the passive. So Dennoch wird in Europa keine Entscheidung getroffen. Why? Because it's harder. If you use the impersonal pronoun, you have a pronoun, and you can form a subject, verb, object sentence. If you use the passive, object, subject get confused, and it gets very hard to write. So the impersonal pronoun is your friend. It helps you form sentences that are more like English. Here they actually used the passive, and let's see, could you say in Europe today nobody makes a major decision? So here you could also use an impersonal pronoun. Without reference to Germany, right? And I'm showing here without reference to Germany is totally optional. You could cross it out in the source text and it wouldn't change the meaning. Without Germany. Major decision can be taken without Germany. Whether they refer to Germany or they ask them or they look at Germany, we don't know. So you can leave it out. You don't need to translate every word. Ironically, so we had a lot of different versions for this one. It is one of the great ironies of the Eurozone crisis. And I just used I adverbialized it into ironically. And we had a lot of other options which are just complicated. So they make it harder for you to write. But if you can't think of something like this, you can say, es ist eine der großen Ironien der Eurozone. Der Krise, ne? You could say that. Ironischerweise hat die gemeinsame Währung, so now it was very hard for a lot of people to bring out this irony, to bring it to the point, right? Because as we say, humor doesn't translate. Ironischerweise hat die gemeinsame Währung, die Deutschland enger an Europa binden sollte, original intention, in der Eurokrise Deutschlands Stärke untermauert, unintended effect, right? So they are describing an unintended effect. It is one of the great ironies of the Eurozone crisis that the single currency, an original purpose, which was designed to bind Germany more closely into Europe, has ended up confirming Germany's strength. Very hard to write. I saw a lot of people still had problems with that. So the key is, I think, to keep it simple, not use a lot of verbs. I saw many people had tried to use like for every subordinate clause they were using like 2 verbs or something like that. Makes it a lot harder. Ironischerweise, see, I have like 3 parts to the sentence, kind of. Hat binden sollte. Okay, so these are 2 verbs. One is modifying the other. In der Eurokrise Deutschland Stärke untermauert. And then another verb in this part. One way to make it easier, because untermauert is not a very accessible verb to everybody. In der Eurokrise Deutschland gestärkt. Die Stärke untermauern. This is what we call a Funktionsverbgefüge. So, or in English we call it like a nominalized verb. It has reinforced the strength, and you could also just say it has made them stronger. That would be a verbalized expression. Now I'm starting with the playing around with the verbs. Look at this. For many Germans, this remains an uncomfortable truth. Das ist die unangenehme Wahrheit für viele Deutsche. Good translation. Viele Deutsche fühlen sich in dieser Rolle unbehaglich. Also stated in a different way. Viele finden das schwer zu akzeptieren. Hard to accept. Many find that hard to accept. Somebody very strict would say, oh, that sounds a little English, but it's not wrong. We say that. Es ist schwer zu akzeptieren. So there are many ways to say that, and I'm saying it in another way, playing around, and I'm pulling the verb one trick. I'm pulling the verb into the strong position, in the initial position in the sentence. If you notice, I'm starting the sentence with the verb. It's not a anerkennen wollen das viele Deutsche nur ungern. Anerkennen wollen das viele Deutsche nur ungern. So this is verb, object, das, subject, Deutsche. It's a VOS sentence. It's totally turned around. So I'm also doing that to mark like their unwillingness to recognize this. You could also say, viele Deutsche wollen das nur ungern anerkennen. And then you have a standard sentence. Now, the foreign minister, Guido Westerwelle, recently told his compatriots. That was very hard, because here we have to think about who is talking to whom. And if we don't know the intended audience of this translation, we can't translate Guido Westerwelle, basically, because we have to know, is the audience, are they Germans or are they not Germans? Because if they are Germans, we could say Außenminister Westerwelle, everybody knows. If they are not a German audience, or if it has to be a literal translation, somebody told you it needs to be literal, then you can say the foreign minister, then you have to say der Außenminister, Guido Westerwelle, then you have to make it literal, because at that time when this was written, everybody knew who Westerwelle was and what was his job in Germany. Außenminister, and it might be different with a lower level politician, right? Then you might have to write their full name. Erzählte seinen Landsleuten kürzlich, and it's also hard, wer sind seine Landsleute? If this is written for a German audience, the article is speaking to them in the third person, which is also kind of weird, no? So you could say, erzählte kürzlich. You could actually cut it out and get rid of the problem. Oder verlautbarte. Erzählte is kind of, then it doesn't work anymore, because you have to erzähl it to somebody, right? It has to be transitive. But you could use an intransitive verb. Außenminister Westerwelle verkündete kürzlich. And here again, we're using a simple present and a time marker. Sorry, not simple present, simple past. Erzählte, erste Vergangenheitsform. Erzählte seinen Landsleuten kürzlich. And we don't say, hat seinen Landsleuten kürzlich erzählt. We never write that. But we say that. We speak like that all the time. So very big difference between written and spoken language. Ich warne vor jeglicher Form teutonischer Überheblichkeit. I warn us against any form from Teutonic snootiness. If you're paying attention, I warn us. I warn us. Is that reflexive if you're saying, or is that transitive? I'm not sure if you say I warn us. In any case, in German, you can make this intransitive. Ich warne vor. Ich warne vor. I warn against any form of Teutonic snootiness. You could do that in English too, but a lot of times you can't. I warn against jegliche Form teutonischer Überheblichkeit. And that was hard also with this teutonischer Überheblichkeit. Jeglicher Form teutonischer Überheblichkeit. First of all, you could use a lot of different words. You could use Arroganz, Übermut, or something like that. So don't get stuck on. But I think arrogance is your friend. But for that, you have to know English really well. You have to know, like, snootiness is not a term that everybody maybe knows. But arrogance, I think, is, if you translate snootiness into arrogance, then you have an internationalism, and they often work. Like, they can help you if you say, oh, teutonische Arroganz would also work. Some weren't sure if to say Form von teutonischer Überheblichkeit, if we need a preposition there, or der teutonischen Überheblichkeit. I tried to drop the preposition, sorry, not a preposition, of an article. Form der von teutonischer Überheblichkeit. Here's a preposition, von oder der teutonischen, right? And I just try to drop them. You don't need that. Jahrzehntelang spielte Deutschland seinen Einfluss herunter, and this was a very hard one. For decades, Germany has pretended to be less influential than it was. Pretending was very hard to translate. Pretending to be less influential. First of all, some readers, they did not get the intention behind it. Like, did they want to pretend, or were they trying to, or were they just ignoring it? For example, we had one translation: Im Laufe der Jahrzehnte beabsichtigte Deutschland weniger Einfluss auszuüben, als es tatsächlich tat. And that doesn't mean it. That's not pretended, that's intended actually. So those are close together. That's hard. Here I'm using a very simple herunterspielen. This is a very basic verb, but hard to know if you don't know it, right? You could also say täuschte. Nee, you couldn't say vortäuschen. Or Deutschland täuschte einen geringeren Einfluss vor. And this was a very hard sentence. Try translating it again for practice. For decades, Germany had pretended to be less important than it was. First of all, Jahrzehnt, here again, we have the time marker, jahrzehntelang, spielte, simple past. And in Germany, in English, it says it's the perfect form, right? Had pretended, or the third form of the past, it had pretended. Jahrzehntelang hatte Deutschland seinen Einfluss heruntergespielt. No, not necessary, because again, we always normally when we have a time, we mark it lexically. We mark it with an extra word. So here again, einige wünschten sich, and as I said, I like working with these impersonal pronouns, einige. So these are some people or something like that. Some wanted the euro to be a kind of greater Switzerland. Others proposed, von mancher Seite wurde eine mit der Schweiz vergleichbare Position angestrebt. That's why I say you shouldn't use the passive if it's longer, at least. Or, usually the impersonal pronoun is just shorter than the passive. Von mancher Seite wurde eine mit der Schweiz vergleichbare Position angestrebt. Very bureaucratic phrase. Not wrong, just long. Einige wünschten sich eine Art große Schweiz. A kind of greater Switzerland. Eine Art could actually, because you're using the quotation marks to actually say that this is not a great. They didn't want great Switzerland. You're already relativizing it. You don't need the art, maybe. This hedging. All of this disappeared. Wünschten, you could, or what would be even smarter, to create cohesion. Solche Wünsche, right? Wünschten, solche Wünsche. And now you have, like, the sentences are connected. This is a little advanced. You have to go through the translation a couple of times to actually come up with that. But einige wünschen sich eine Art große Schweiz. Solche Wünsche. So whatever pronoun here. Verschwanden in der Euro-Krise. All of that disappeared with the Euro crisis. All of that, here they're using a pronoun. I'm using a noun, right? Because I want to create cohesion. And you could also write like all dies. You could translate all of that more literally, no problem. Verschwanden in der Euro-Krise, because they're writing they disappeared with the Eurozone crisis. And this is ambiguous because it could mean the crisis was over and then all the problems were gone too. No. What actually happened was they disappeared as soon as the crisis started. So you could just write, dass die verschwanden mit der Euro-Krise, but if you want to be like a smartass like me, you can make a different here. Verschwanden in der Euro-Krise oder mit Einsätzen der Euro-Krise to highlight that they're not the same, that they didn't disappear together. Eine deutsche Zeitung schrieb, as one German paper said. You could also just here, right? You could cut out the as. That's stuff I do like automatically. One German paper said, nicht wie eine deutsche Zeitung schrieb. Eine deutsche Zeitung schrieb, auf einmal erkennen sie, dass die Welt sie braucht, um den Euro zu retten und eine Weltwirtschaftskatastrophe abzuwenden. So what am I doing here? Auf einmal erkennen sie, they are suddenly. Do we know who they are? No, we have no idea. But we're just going to use the pronoun. If we had an idea, if this wasn't a quote, maybe you could use the noun to make it clear who they're talking about. We don't know, so stick to the pronoun. Auf einmal erkennen sie, dass die Welt sie braucht, that the world is relying on them. You could be more literal and say, dass die Welt sich auf sie verlässt, but if the world needs them, it's also relying on them. I made it more simple that the world needs them to save. In English, it would have a double meaning. If the world needs them to, it would mean like the world is expecting them to. Small nuance. To rescue the euro and avert a disaster for the global economy. A disaster for the global economy. And German, one thing I like about German, I'm not a big fan of the language, but that a disaster for the global economy, in English you could also do that, but often you don't do it. A global economic disaster, Weltwirtschaftskatastrophe. You can really form these long compounds. They make your writing easier. If you don't want to do it, you could say eine Katastrophe für die Weltwirtschaft oder eine Katastrophe für die globale Wirtschaft. Valid options. Der Artikel fährt fort. The article continued. So here I'm also, eine deutsche Zeitung schrieb, der Artikel fährt fort. Here I'm going back to the narrative present, right? It would be very odd to write, der Artikel fuhr fort. Eine deutsche Zeitung schrieb, but then you kind of switch to the present. Der Artikel fuhr fort. Or you could write it all in the present. Eine deutsche Zeitung schreibt. And then it's clear, because if we read it, it's written in the past, right? Der Artikel fährt fort, and that's like continue, fortfahren. I wouldn't know what other verb to use here. Die Deutschen belegen gerade einen Crashkurs. The Germans are going through a crash course in being a leading power. Die Deutschen belegen gerade einen Crashkurs für Führungskräfte. I'm kind of nominalizing that. I'm cutting out the being. Einen Crashkurs dafür, Führungskräfte zu sein, right? I'm making it a lot shorter. We have other options. Die Deutschen lernen gerade im Eilverfahren eine Führungsmacht zu sein. Also works. Here they're using the verb, right? To be, being. Die Deutschen gehen durch einen Crashkurs im Status der führenden Macht. Doesn't work. So lining up more and more nouns is not always a good option. Writing it shorter usually is, because it forces you to order your thoughts. Für Deutschland ist das eine Art Crashkurs als Führungskraft. Works. For Germany, this is a kind of crash course. What's important here? Deutschland, Crashkurs, Führungskraft, or die Deutschen. Deutschland, Crashkurs, Führungskraft. So these three have to be there. Die Deutschen belegen gerade einen Crashkurs für Führungskräfte. And I'm being literal. I'm saying the Germans. Others have said Germany as a symbol for all Germans. Whatever you choose. Choose the one that's easier to describe, because if you have the Germans, you have to use the plural. If you have Germany, you can use the singular. Think about that. Ein schmerzhafter Prozess. It has been a painful process. Es war ein schmerzhafter Prozess. You could say that, but you can also make it shorter. And then you added a colon here. Zuerst wurden ein schmerzhafter Prozess. Zuerst wurden die Deutschen für ihre langsame Reaktion kritisiert. Initially, the Germans were criticized for acting too slowly. And if you translate this very literally, it would mean, anfangs wurden die Deutschen kritisiert dafür kritisiert, dass sie zu langsam handelten. Verbal doesn't work. So, you have to nominalize. Zuerst wurden die Deutschen für ihre langsame Reaktion kritisiert. Oder zuerst wurde die langsame Reaktion der Deutschen kritisiert. Then a cohesive device here, you see that underlined, kritisiert, vorgeworfen. I pulled the verb to the front position, kritisiert, vorgeworfen, these belong together. They were criticized and accused for putting the interests, putting is a gerund. Gerund indicates normally that we can nominalize in German. Wurde ihnen die Bevorzugung, so ihnen wurde vorgeworfen, deutsche Steuerzahlerinteressen zu bevorzugen. You can say that, but it's a gerund and it's usually very easy to translate as a noun. Vorgeworfen wurde ihnen die Bevorzugungen deutscher Steuerzahlerinteressen. And here I have to use the passive. You could also say, man warf ihnen die Bevorzugung vor. You could say that too. But I want to have the verb in initial position, as I mentioned, for cohesion. Deutscher Steuerzahlinteressen und mangelnde Solidarität. So again, nominalized gegenüber Rest Europa. And Rest Europa, I'm also nominalizing again. Nominalizing. I like that about German. They were accused of putting the interests of German taxpayers above the rest of Europe and of lacking solidarity, right? Lacking, they're using gerunds here, and I would not translate this as verbs. I would use a noun. Bevorzugung deutscher Steuerzahlerinteressen, right? The interests of German taxpayers. Die Interessen deutscher Steuerzahler. You could also say that. Die Interessen deutscher Steuerzahler works too. Und ein Mangel an Solidarität. You could also say it that way, or you can use adjective mangelnde Solidarität, noun. And the rest of Europe. If you don't know, you don't know, but you can form this compound. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I can't really tell you Rest Europa if that is a fixed phrase or not, but somehow it just works here. And in English, the rest of Europe, yeah, you can't say rest Europe or something like that. Again, Rest Europa, I'm ending the sentence with Rest Europa, again, using the cohesion device, pulling this is a new paragraph, pulling the object to the front again. Gegenüber Rest Europa, starting with the object, die südeuropäischen Länder bekamen letztendlich doch Hilfe aus Berlin. Berlin would help the countries of Southern Europe. So here the subject is Berlin. I'm putting it in the last position, starting the sentence with the object, because I want to create cohesion between the end of the previous sentence. Received finally help from Berlin. Would help, really hard. Would help. And as I mentioned, we cannot express the would. We have no tense to express that really. Berlin hat den Ländern Südeuropas letztlich doch geholfen. You can say it that way. Die südeuropäischen Länder haben letztendlich doch Hilfe aus Europa bekommen, haben am Ende doch bekommen. But the simple past solves your problem. Simple past, simple present, because bekamen letztendlich, here again is a marker, would help, right? Bekamen letztendlich, very important. Would help the countries of Europe. Bekamen letztendlich doch. So I'm using actually 3 words to translate would. Bekamen letztendlich doch. Because in English you would mark this by the pronunciation. You would say Berlin would help the countries of Southern Europe. And in German you need to mark it with a modal particle, doch. They did finally receive help from Berlin. The Southern Europeans did finally receive help from Berlin. And in English, you can express that in 1 word. In German, you can't. You need 3. Aber im Gegenzug mussten sie Kostenschnitte und Reformen durchführen. But in exchange, they would have to cost and embrace reforms. And is this a conjunctive? They would have to cut costs, but they're not talking about what is that? A potential state. Irreales, you say, right? No, it's it actually did happen then. So they're talking about the future, spoken from the past, kind of. But I'm still using a simple past and it works. Aber im Gegenzug mussten sie Kostenschnitte und Reformen durchführen. Here I'm using a Funktionsverbgefüge, FVG. Exchange, they would have to cut costs, embrace reforms. I didn't want to say Kosten senken und Reformen durchführen. Because why? Simple, I'm a lazy ass. I have the Funktionsverb durchführen and I can stretch it to include both the nouns. Otherwise I have to say Kosten senken und Reformen durchführen. I need 2 verbs. I just want 1. And the way to do that is to nominalize Kosten senken, and you can nominalize that by saying either Kostenschnitte or Kostensenkungen durchführen. In other words, they put a second sentence, right? Have an introduction. In other words, become more like sentence. Germany, in these cases, like these in other words, or this means, you can just use an en dash, the short one, halbgeviert Strich. You can use a dash because the dash kind of tells you that that's what it means. The result, they had to become more like Germany. Mehr wie Deutschland, we found out actually, sie mussten Deutscher werden. You could also say that kind of in a figurative sense. Sie mussten mehr wie Deutschland werden. Here again, underlining, cohesion. Wie Deutschland werden, dessen Entscheider. Sie mussten mehr wie Deutschland werden, dessen Entscheider, dessen pronoun, dessen, I guess. Anyways, it refers to Deutschland, dessen Entscheider. You can't say Führer in German. We had the problem before with Führungskräfte. We can't, it's hard to translate like leadership into Germany. Dessen Entscheider. So I'm using the decision makers. I'm not saying Germany's leaders, German leaders. There was only one German leader, and now we have to say, now everyone after him is just called decision makers. Sehen Haushaltskürzungen und Arbeitsmarktreformen als einzige Mittel. German leaders believe there is no other route to economic health than by cutting costs, budgets and reforming labor laws. Literal translation, deutsche Führer glauben, es gäbe keinen anderen Weg zu ökonomischer Gesundheit als durch das Reduzieren von Budgets und das Reformieren der Arbeitsmarktgesetzgebung. Problem here, gäbe, you would need a Konjunktiv 1. this reported speech that's expressing a wish. And instead of doing that, I'm saying, dessen Entscheider sehen Haushaltskürzungen und Arbeitsmarktreformen als einzige Mittel. I'm saying it in a different way, because otherwise, if I translated it literally, I would have to use this Konjunktiv. I don't like the Konjunktiv. I try to avoid it at all costs. Find a way, maybe nominalize or something, right? Dessen Entscheider sehen Haushaltskürzungen und Arbeitsmarktreformen. They see budget cuts and labor market reforms as the only means for the recovery of the economy. And I cut out the economy because it's clear. Here again, in other words, I'm doing the same thing. Maybe it'll get boring. Tuck also, dash also, you could also use another way. Also die Flexibilisierung der Arbeitsverhältnisse, making it easier to hire and fire. Hard. We don't want to make it sound so personal. In German, you have to hire and fire somebody. Also Kündigungen und Kündigungen erleichtern is negative. There's hire and fire is more neutral, tending towards positive, because for an employer it could be better to hire and fire. Making it easier to fire people in Germany is never a good thing. So you have to find a euphemism. You'd have to know the political language. And in the German political language, they would say something like, make them more flexible. Flexibilisierung der Arbeitsverhältnisse. And see, I'm nominalizing throughout. This is super nominalized the sense. Dessen Entscheider sehen Haushaltskürzungen, in other words, cutting the budget, und Arbeitsmarktreformen, reforming the labor market, as only means to for the economy to recover. In other words, making it easier to hire and fire people. And here I'm also nominalizing Flexibilisierung der Arbeitsmarktverhältnisse. Nominalization, great thing. Then again, using the cohesive device, Flexibilisierung der Arbeitsverhältnisse, bam, daraus folgende Gehaltskürzungen und Arbeitslosigkeit. Daraus, so this is how Germans often create cohesion, using either pronouns or pulling the verb to the initial position. Daraus folgende Gehaltskürzungen und Arbeitslosigkeit führten in weiten Teilen Südeuropas zu Ressentiments. Ressentiments is a resentment, is a weaker term for like anger or hate or whatever, rage. Politicians like to use this term, so you can use it too, when they don't want to talk about like the people's anger, der Volkszorn. Der Volkszorn, den gibt's nicht, im Bundestag gibt's keinen Volkszorn, da gibt's nur Ressentiments. Daraus folgende Gehaltskürzung und Arbeitslosigkeit führten in weiten Teilen Südeuropas zu Ressentiments, and compare that to the English, as wages were cut, verbalized, right? As wages were cut and unemployment rose, verb, in many parts of Southern Europe, it stoked resentment. Or you can say resentment was stoked, right? This is an auxiliary pronoun. Daraus folgende Gehaltskürzung und Arbeitslosigkeit. So I'm nominalizing because Gehaltskürzung und Arbeitslosigkeit führten, then I can make them the subject, führten in weiten Teilen Südeuropas zu Ressentiments, then again using this cohesive. And if I call these things wrong, I don't know. Just let me know. Deren is a pronoun too, right? Deren politische Urheber in Berlin, aber auch in Brüssel gesehen werden. And gesehen werden, we have to use an impersonal. We could also say man in Brüssel oder Berlin sieht, but these are basically the two options that you have. Deren politische Urheber in Berlin, aber auch in Brüssel gesehen werden. Urheber was a problem. Are seen as the author of this policy for example, you can't translate autor as autor here because author here is a synonym. They don't mean they are like, yeah, or die Autoren dieser Politik. You can't say that, die Autoren dieser Politik. You can't say that. No, it doesn't work. Politische Urheber, you could say deren Schuldige, the perpetrators are seen as the perpetrators. You can translate the authors as perpetrators. Author of this policy could also be perpetrator, the bad guys, and then you could say deren Schuldige, right? To make it easy if you don't know terms like politischer Urheber, which I can understand, deren Schuldige in Berlin, aber auch in Brüssel gesehen werden. So that was some tips on how to handle the translation for the government exam. We will have like 45 minutes, no dictionary. You have to do it all on paper. You're gonna have some time to revise. For my version, I wrote it down one time, a little more literal, and then what I did in the revision especially was to pull all the verbs to the initial position and add like these funky little pronouns like daraus and deren and so, and to make it to improve the cohesion, make it sound more like German. Because if you don't do that, what's going to happen is it's going to sound just like a lot of random sentences put together, the text, and not like a cohesive target text. So if you have any questions, leave them below, and for now, good luck.